Chapter 4.
Well, let's talk about your curfew.
Very funny, I said. Uncle Harry continued.
I think you're old enough now we can move it up to 11 o'clock, but not 1 minute after.
Do you see how I'm holding my sides here laughing? I had stopped by Harry's apartment, which is directly above the magic store and directly below my apartment, to say goodnight as I was heading out to the reunion.
Now who you going with, Buster? Is it someone I know?
He was parroting the questions Aunt Alice had asked me all through high school and using the nickname he'd given me as a kid, and I wasn't enjoying it any more now than I had then, but I played along. I already told you, Jake North, my old classmate. He's the one in town doing the film about Terry Alexander.
Is he? Harry said absently. Do I know his parents? I think I should call his mother, just so I'm sure we're all on the same page.
You know, you really should have billed yourself as a comedian. I think you missed your calling.
Calling? Yes. Good point,
he said, jumping up to grab a pad and pen by the phone.
I want you to call me when you get there, and then call me when you're leaving. Do you have a number where I can reach you?
Yes, it's called my cell phone. You already use it to call me 10 times a day, and I have the phone company records to prove it. So fear not, there is no point in the evening when you won't be able to call me. Of course, whether or not I'll answer is up for debate, I added, as I started to close his apartment door.
Well, have fun. Don't talk to strangers. And remember, just say no to drugs.
The last word was cut off as I swung the door shut and headed down the stairs. As Jake and I pulled up to the hotel in downtown Minneapolis where the reunion was being held, I had a sudden and intense memory. This hotel had been the site of a particularly memorable past performance. The show, which was in one of the main ballrooms, was for a charity function, although I couldn't remember the specific worthy cause. All I could remember about the evening was that the chairwoman of the event had insisted on singing before my act. To the accompaniment of a karaoke track, she had stumbled her way through I Will Survive, but her voice made a mockery of the title. She had abandoned the song in the middle of the second verse, explaining to the crowd that she had aspirated a filbert earlier in the evening. Ever since then, that explanation had become my go-to excuse anytime a show went less well than I might have liked. How was the show? Oh, could have gone better, but I aspirated a filbert earlier in the evening. So while I correctly remembered doing a show at the hotel, I was completely surprised by the hotel's interior atrium. It rose nearly 40 stories, creating a seemingly endless expanse above the main floor lobby. From my dizzying vantage point in the lobby, I could see people scurrying along the open corridors as they moved in and out of their rooms or headed toward the elevator bank. Ah, yes, the elevator bank. I had also forgotten about the elevators, or more likely, never experienced them because the main ballroom was at ground level. The elevator cars were completely transparent, and I'm not just talking about the walls. The floor and ceiling of each car was also made of some sturdy glass-like substance, allowing a perfect view of everyone in every elevator as they made their vertiginous journey up and down. Looking up into the endless atrium and also seeing the elevators had put a sizable lump in my throat and made my pulse rate increase to the point where I could actually hear my heart pounding in my ears. The plan I had constructed with Dr. Bakke had been that I would go up a few floors, like to the second or third floor in the next tall building I go into, and look down over the edge at the lobby below. While doing that, I would practice the breathing tricks he had taught me. I took one more look at the sickening view above me and decided this could wait until later in the evening. "Hey, dude," Jake called to me. "Where are you headed?" I gestured toward the ballroom entrance. "Main ballroom." "We're not in the main ballroom," he said. "According to this, we're in something called the Sky Room." He pointed at a video monitor scrolling a continuous stream of hotel events. It took a while for it to cycle through that day's agenda, but finally the logo for our high school popped up on screen, along with the location of our reunion. The Sky Room. Under that it said, 40th floor.
Up, up, and away,
Jake said as he headed toward the elevators. I didn't move. I felt frozen to the spot, but after taking some healing breaths, I was able to persuade my feet to budge, and I followed him reluctantly to the bank of elevators. The doors to one elevator slid open just as we arrived, and Jake stepped in, whistling softly as he turned to press the destination button on the control panel. I willed myself to follow him in, and once inside, I immediately turned away, pretending to look out at the lobby. In fact, my eyes were tightly shut, and I held on to the handrail with something resembling a death grip. I heard the doors close and felt the elevator begin to rise, moving up much faster than my stomach would have preferred. I could sense lights moving across my shuttered eyes as we headed up, while the sweat from my clenched hands convinced me I might have gripped the railing hard enough to draw blood.
Whoa, Mama, are we flying?
Jake laughed heartily, the voice of a man who clearly lived on the other end of the acrophobia spectrum from me. Yes, we are, I said, working hard to keep any tremor from my voice. It's quite the view, isn't it? We came to a stop as I heard the door open. I turned toward the sound, opening my eyes for the first time. Ahead of me, I saw the welcome embrace of a real floor surrounded by real walls. I started to step forward, and it all would have been fine if I'd had the good sense not to look down. But I didn't. I forgot the floor was transparent as well. My gaze fell to my feet and then to the 40 floors of elevator shaft beneath me and the lobby far below. I froze, my stomach racing up to my mouth, my vision clouding, and my head beginning to spin. I couldn't move, literally couldn't move. The door began to slide shut, but Jake, already out of the elevator car, stuck his hand through the rapidly closing space, grabbed my arm, and pulled me to safety.
Ground control to Major Tom,
he laughed. We have arrived. Our destiny lies before us. Perhaps his destiny lay before him, but it was all I could do to stumble forward and place a hand on the comforting solidity of the wall in front of me. I regained my balance, making sure I didn't turn toward the railing. Jake gestured to a directional sign with our school logo on it and moved jauntily down the corridor, following the route indicated.
We're down here,
he called over his shoulder as he moved confidently along the hallway. My movements were considerably slower and lacked any of his confidence. With one hand lightly touching the wall to steady myself, I followed him at half his pace, making sure I didn't look to my left. The railing that overlooked the atrium was about 4 feet away, and I felt its pull like a magnet. A voice, a feeling, a sense deep in my head was whispering, "Go to the rail, look down, jump." I again tried to engage in one of the breathing exercises Dr. Baki had taught me, but even as I went through the motions, I sensed I wasn't actually breathing, just pulling air in and out and never really letting any of it settle into my lungs. At this rate, I would hyperventilate myself into unconsciousness in a matter of minutes, which at the moment struck me as a pretty solid plan B. Ahead of me, I could see Jake stop at the open double doors that looked to be my salvation. If I could make it to that portal, I'd be able to put much-needed distance between myself and the frightening yet tempting rail. Once through that blessed door, it would be out of sight and therefore out of mind. I shuffled along the corridor, touching the wall as I went, more for psychological than physical support. Jake cocked his head at my progress, and so I put on a burst of speed and was able to finally get to and through the door. Jake slapped me on the back and propelled me further into the room, and then took a stance next to me. A table to my right contained row after row of name tags in plastic holders. The table was being supervised by an excessively perky woman I vaguely recognized. "Hi, guys," she said brightly, as she pulled back her wildly floral scarf to reveal her name tag. "I'm Joanne. I was Joanne Murray, then was Joanne Murray Hill for a hellacious 4 years, and now I'm back to good old Joanne Murray. Single and loving it. You're with the reunion, right?" We agreed we were, and she looked at us and then at the badges and then did a double take looking back at Jake. "You're not going to need this," she said with a flirtatious smile as she pulled his badge from the table. "Everybody knows you." Then she turned to me. "And you are?" I paused, momentarily forgetting my name. "Eli," I finally stuttered. "Eli Marks." "Eli Marks. Oh, yes, you're here somewhere." She scanned the row of badges until she came to mine. "There you go," she said, handing it to me. "And then we just need to do this." She deftly took my right hand while at the same time picking up a rubber stamp off the table. She daubed it on an ink pad and, with a practiced move, applied it to the back of my hand, leaving me with an oddly shaped black smudge. "That's so we can tell you from the freeloaders in the hotel who try to sneak in and graze from our buffet," she said, gesturing for Jake to submit to the same procedure. He put his hand in hers, and she took her own sweet time applying the mark, even finding a moment at the conclusion of the process to stare into his eyes. "You're all set," she finally said, breathlessly. "Thanks, Joanne," Jake said with his $1,000,000 smile, and she blushed and turned away. Left to my own devices, I began the slow process of pinning my name tag to my coat while Jake softly whistled as he assessed the room. I started to step forward, but he gently stopped me with a hand to my chest. "Wait," he said quietly. "They will come to us." He was right, and they did, although it quickly became apparent that they were actually coming to the singular him and not to the plural us. While I was the grateful recipient of a handful of half-hearted nods, the majority of the people made a beeline toward Jake. As the crowd became larger, I felt myself disappearing, like the guy in the movie The Incredible Shrinking Man, who eventually got so small he vanished entirely. To forestall that eventuality, I wandered away from the crowd. A food buffet took up the center of the room, while cash bars were positioned in 2 of the room's 4 corners. One of the bars was right next to an open set of double doors, which led to the exterior observation deck, visible through a large picture window to the left of the door. Given the steady flow of people headed that way, the deck and its amazing view turned out to be a big draw for everyone, except me. Having no desire to observe anything on or from the observation deck, I made my way to the other bar, where a skilled but bored college girl was happy to sell me a beer, and even happier, all the change she gave me went right into her tip jar. Having spent years working for tips in restaurants, I over-tip from habit, and it took me a second to realize the voice saying, "Hey, thanks," was hers. "No problem," I said, taking a quick swig of beer. My mouth had been desert dry since the elevator ride from hell. "How's the crowd tonight?" "About typical for a 15-year reunion, I guess. The guys are all losing their hair and denying it, and the women have finally figured out how to apply makeup, but still can't handle walking in heels," she said with a deadpan I liked immediately. "You do a lot of these?" I asked. "More than I'd like." "What keeps bringing you back?" She nodded toward the tip jar. "And, of course," she added with a smile, "the sparkling conversation." "You get a lot of sparkling conversation?" "Do kangaroos get hiccups?" She grabbed a small rag and began cleaning the top of her portable bar. "You want to know the secret to reunions?" "Lay it on me," I said. "The secret to a reunion is this. Forget it's a reunion. Everyone approaches it like they're still in high school, and when you do it that way, all the old patterns and responses come flooding back. But," she continued, leaning toward me across the bar, "the truth is, if you met any one of these people for the first time today, you wouldn't give them a second thought. They have no power over you whatsoever. So why are you giving them power just because their locker was across from yours 20 years ago?" 15 years, I corrected, but I see your point. "The fact is, "The counter has reset to 0, she said in a dramatic whisper. "The past has no power. Today's a new day, and history can go screw itself." Well put. Now get out of here and knock 'em dead, Tiger. Eli Marks, man of the hour. I looked up from my lonely spot at one of the many empty tables to see Roger Edison, looking younger than his years and smiling ear to ear. "Roger," I said, dropping a limpy carrot and wiping my hand on the tablecloth before extending it to him. He returned my gesture with a fist bump, the conclusion of which included the sound effect of an explosion, courtesy of his lips. "What are you doing sitting over here all by yourself and not sucking up to our resident TV star?" He gestured toward the crowd that still surrounded Jake. "I rode in with him," I said, "so I've already had my fill of wonderfulness." "How's it going?" Roger sat down and leaned back in his chair, looking out across the room. "Typically pathetic. These people have no small talk in them," he said. "Most of them are good for 2 minutes tops, and then they start checking their phones for emails. What has happened to us as a nation in our ability to chat?" "Well, you still have the skill," I offered. "That I do, but I chat for a living," he said. "Still selling insurance?" "It sells itself. I'm just the midwife." He stole a chip off my plate, flew it over the dollop of dip, and then thought better of it. "Speaking of which, did you bring a wife tonight? Girlfriend? Or," he added with a smile, "a boyfriend?" "None of the above. I'm currently in the box marked single." Perfect timing. "It is?" "Absolutely. From a strictly actuarial point of view, this is the ideal reunion at which to meet a potential mate." "How do you figure?" "Look at the stats. 15 years from high school graduation, most of these folks have finished an undergraduate degree. Some have a graduate degree. They've moved 4.5 times, and they're on their 3rd full-time job since college. Those who have married are getting tired of it and are ready for a change, and those who are single are getting bored with that lifestyle and are ready to settle down. Now, it's the perfect storm relationship-wise, and you're at the eye of the storm. Embrace it." "I don't know," I said. "I was just in a relationship. We're on hold or something. I don't know." "Ambiguity is central to the human condition. The sooner you realize that, the happier you'll be." He stood up, grabbing one more of my chips as he did. "All right, I'm going to keep working the room," he said, putting out his hand for a quick shake. After he'd gone, I opened my hand to find that he'd been kind enough to leave me his business card. Jake was holding court at a table with a ring of people seated and 2 or 3 concentric rings of people standing and watching the action. There was a burst of laughter from the group as I approached. "And that's what happens when you cut in front of George Clooney in the express lane at Ralph's," Jake said, obviously providing a kicker to a longer story and inciting another round of laughter from the group. Just as the laughter subsided, Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a deck of cards. "So, who wants to see a card trick?" he asked. My experience has been the fastest way to clear the room at a party is to ask, "So, who wants to see a card trick?" next to, "Anyone else here have the flu?" It's a surefire method for inducing a mass exit. However, Jake's current celebrity status was enough to keep the audience in place, so he began to go through some standard tricks he had learned for his portrayal of Terry Alexander. His performance surprised me. For someone who's been acting since high school and who currently makes what I can only guess is an envy-inducing salary on a hit TV show, Jake's skills as a performing magician were surprisingly bad. As he had demonstrated in our coffee shop meeting, he had gained the chops to physically make the cards do what he wanted without drawing undue attention to his moves. But his performance in front of an otherwise enthusiastic audience drove home for me one of the axioms Uncle Harry has been spouting for as long as I can remember. It's not about the trick or the effect. It's about the connection the performer makes with his audience. And Jake was not connecting with his audience. In fact, he was headed full speed in the opposite direction. His first trick was a simple ace production, where he made 4 aces appear at the top of an apparently completely shuffled deck. The woman who he chose to help him I first recognized as Roseanne Roosevelt's mother, until I realized it was in fact Roseanne Roosevelt herself. I had fond memories of Roseanne. We had suffered through a particularly grueling algebra class together, but that was nothing compared to what Jake was putting her through now. The charm and poise that was so natural to Jake in real life completely left him in this setting. Admittedly, he wasn't helped by the constant snap-snap of the reunion's photographer, who saw before him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Celebrity alum does a card trick. I'm not sure there was a market for such a series of photos, but that didn't seem to be slowing the photographer one iota. As Jake, ever the trooper, plowed on, I could feel the energy draining from the group even as the trick reached a conclusion that should have been startling, but in his hands was just merely perplexing. Undeterred, he forged ahead, unwisely choosing to attempt triumph, a stunning card trick in the hands of a master like Di Vernon, but a train wreck in lesser hands. And tonight, Jake was definitely steering his train into the side of a cliff, stumbling through the setup and completely missing the nuance and drama of that trick. "Someone's clearly missing that magic spark tonight," a voice whispered in my ear. I nodded in agreement and then turned to see who had taken me into their confidence, and I nearly fell over when I saw who it was. While I certainly suffered through my fair share of high school crushes, the one that was the most fruitless and thus resulted in the longest-lasting heartache was Trish Henry. She was pretty, funny, smart, popular, and at least to the high school version of me, completely unattainable. If we had exchanged 2 sentences in 4 years, I would be surprised. Consequently, I was amazed she was standing next to me, and even more surprised she had deigned to not only talk to me, but to actually whisper in my ear. I felt myself falling back into those high school feelings and could almost feel myself morphing into a 16-year-old version of me on the spot. And then I remembered the bartender and her words of advice. Treat these people like you're just meeting them for the first time. Wise words, I thought. Wise words. So I turned to Trish, planning to give her a casual smile and nod, and I was hit with a stark realization. If I were meeting her for the first time today, I would still be stunned into stupidity. She certainly had aged, like the rest of us, but somehow she had gotten prettier while getting older. Nice trick if you can do it. "Everyone has an off night," I finally whispered in return. She smiled warmly, and I turned back to watch poor Jake, who had gotten lost in the middle of the routine and lacked the skills to bluff his way out of it. In desperation, he flipped over the top card. "Is this your card?" he asked with forced good cheer, even though the real stunner in the trick was that all the reversed cards in the deck should have returned to their original positions. His confused participant nodded grimly, and Jake thanked her and looked around feverishly, trying to come up with a closer before his audience wandered off to find some actual entertainment. And then he spotted me. "Okay, now you're in for a treat," he said, suddenly taking on the deportment of a club MC. "Here's the man who taught me everything I know and then some. Put your hands together for the magical stylings of the one, the only, magical Eli Marks." He waved his arms in my direction, and everyone turned more out of curiosity than actual interest. I could see Jake's face noticeably relax as the audience shifted their attention from him to me. I wasn't sure what was expected of me, but then I heard Trish say something I never expected the girl of my dreams to utter. "Eli, do a magic trick for us." Even 15 years later, the crowd instinctively fell in line with her wishes, and I heard enthusiastic utterances as someone stood up and offered me their chair. I pulled my ever-ready deck of cards from my coat pocket as I sat, not at all certain what I intended to do and hoping my performance instincts would kick in. Like, right now. Searching for an inspiration, I looked up and saw Trish smiling down at me. "Trish, what was the name of that dog your family had when we were in high school?" I asked, looking up at her. I could tell she was surprised I even knew she had a dog, and it took her a moment to pull the name. As she worked on it, I gestured toward the chair next to me. The current occupant bounded to his feet as Trish stepped forward and sat. "Sam," she said, or Samuel J. Smithereens, which was the full name I gave him. "Sam was a great dog," I lied, knowing nothing about the dog, but glad that my gambit had paid off. I opened the blue bicycle deck and pulled out the cards. And I think dogs and cards have a lot in common. They both travel in packs, they do tricks, and sometimes we pick a card or a dog, and sometimes they pick us. While saying this, I gave the cards a quick Hindu shuffle. I then spread the cards face up and held them in front of Trish. "So, like a dog, do we pick a card, or do they pick us? Let's examine that idea, Trish. Pick a card. Any card at all." She ran a finger across the card spread, finally landing on the Jack of Hearts. "Is that your pick?" I asked. She nodded and pulled the card from the deck. "That's interesting," I said, squaring the remaining cards, "because out of an entire deck of blue back cards, you picked the only card with a red back." I gestured to the blue back deck in my hands, while Trish turned her card over. It indeed had a red back. This produced the intended aha from the group. I set the cards on their box as I took the card from Trish and held it up. "Now, that's a good trick for a card to do, and that might be all the tricks this particular card knows. Unless," I said, setting the card face down on the table in front of her, "it knows how to change back to blue." "Cover the card with your hand," I instructed, and Trish did what she was told, the corners of her mouth turning up in a smile of wonder, and tell it to change back. She hesitated a second before saying it. "Change back. Take your hand away." She did, and I could tell she was disappointed the card's back remained red. "Perhaps it would help if you named your card. Can you give it a name?" I could tell I put her on the spot. She was having trouble coming up with anything. "It's a cliché," I said, trying to help her out, "but how about Jack?" She nodded in appreciation. I gestured toward the card, and once again she covered it with her hand. "Okay, Jack," she said hopefully. "Change." She waited a beat and took her hand away. Again, instantly disappointed, the card back steadfastly remained red. "Not to despair," I said. "Changing from blue to red might be the only trick Jack knows, and he can't change back. Or," I added, picking up the face-up deck, "it's possible Jack is, in fact, the leader of the pack. And if that's the case, it would be simpler for the whole pack to change." With that, I turned the deck over and spread the cards, revealing the once blue-back deck had magically changed to red. This produced the odd reaction I anticipated, but I didn't stop or even slow down. I rode that momentum. "Let's see what other tricks Jack might know," I said, instructing Trish to bury the card deep in the deck. I shuffled and cut the cards and continued the routine, with Trish's card continuing to perform like a dog, jumping up to the top of the deck, coming when it was called, and finally rolling over. This last bit closed out the routine as I fanned the cards for her, revealing that only one card in the entire deck had rolled over and was face down, the Jack of Hearts. Trish started the applause, and everyone, even Jake, joined in. But for me, the best part of the crowd's reaction was Trish's smile and her subsequent request, asking shyly if she could keep the card. I gladly handed her the Jack of Hearts, and her smile seemed almost demure as she took it from me. I looked at that smile and wondered how things like my whole life, might have been different if she had smiled at me like that 15 years before. And later on, I would look back at this night and wonder how things might have also ended up quite differently if Jake hadn't, at least figuratively, aspirated a filbert.